To any parent, "It's not fair" is probably one of the earliest and most instinctive cries they hear as their toddlers begin that journey into the tantrums and tears of growing up. Now, I'm no psychologist, but that suggests to me that justice is more than a learned social norm, but something visceral and definitive in terms of what it means to be human. Very often, it's their parent to whom they address this protest, so we can hardly say it's something that we've taught them. And we might look back through our social history and celebrate many institutions, many principles that have now become enshrined in statute that attribute their existence to being a contemporary or cultural expression of that principle, "It's not fair." And the trades union movement can easily describe itself as one such incarnation. I mean, sure, it's often been caricatured as militant, disruptive, resistive of change, patriarchal, and we may even acknowledge that at times such perceptions have not been entirely unjustified. But as with many institutions, the day-to-day business of a trades union, certainly from my experience as a branch secretary, is not the high-profile militant stuff of strikes and works to rule and picket lines, but the one-to-one meetings, giving voice to those who feel silenced, supporting those who've been harmed and afflicted through work, caring, getting alongside, doing what we can to make things fairer for those who can too easily be overlooked or exploited in the world of work. And as Industrial Christian Fellowship looks back at its history, we too might describe ourselves as giving contemporary tangible expression and response to that primal cry, "It's not fair." The daughter of a Yorkshire clergyman who cried "It's not fair" when 400 navvies arrived at her father's church for the funeral of a young man who'd been killed in a site accident only on his second day at work, was the founder of our movement. Not fair because they gathered in isolation from the mainstream life of the parish church. Not fair because of the appalling working and social conditions in which navvies had to eke out their living. "It's not fair" was the cry of a straight-talking battlefield chaplain as he saw young men running headlong into machine gun fire, writhing in agony from their harrowing wounds after being seduced by images of war that were filled with glory and adventure. "It's not fair," he cried again, as many of those same young men were left destitute and forgotten by the very society that they had given so much to secure. "It's not fair" was the cry of the famous Archbishop William Temple as he asked questions about the underlying causes of inequality and poverty and brought people together to build a vision for society after the Second World Conflict. A vision of a better and fairer world. But sadly, we have to admit that this primal instinct to cry out against injustice can too easily be numbed by circumstances. And one of the startling realities that we recognise from the Victorian era was the way in which so many people simply didn't stop to ask the bigger questions about why. When they were confronted by indescribable poverty and injustice, they just assumed that was how things were. And I think we have to be honest that at times the church allowed itself to simply be a religious reflection of that same unquestioning numbness. But in the late 19th and early years of the 20th century, a group of Oxford academics began to ask some deeper questions. They dared to imagine that poverty and injustice were not just an inevitable reality that had to be lived with, but were living testimony to a society that wasn't fair. And so they formed the Christian Socialist Union, and it was through the fusion of that big picture group, asking the difficult questions of society, and the Navy mission getting its hands dirty, supporting people who were impacted by it, that Industrial Christian Fellowship, ICF, was born. And it was ICF that was one of those who spoke in support of the trades union movement, when at its inception it was greeted with a fair bit of suspicion and concern by respectable religion. But I speak as a theologian, and just as I want to say that this primal cry, "It's not fair," is intrinsic to what makes us human, I'd also say that being human is intrinsic to being made in the image of God. And the God that we discover in the pages of our scriptures is a God with an alarming commitment to social justice, an unflinching ability to cry out, "It's not fair." A God who is not particularly impressed with religion when it loses sight of that call for social justice. Ponder for a moment the words of an Old Testament prophet speaking a message that he believed to be from the very mouth of God. "I detest your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. I have no regard for your offerings. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll like rivers, and righteousness like a never-failing stream." So I believe we have to have faith in social justice, for without it, we are less than human. And speaking as a faith leader, I would dare to argue that faith without justice isn't really faith at all.